Hello, art historians, and welcome to our last series of lectures for this unit, where we're going to start looking at the art of the Roman emperors. So it's important to realize that as we see different emperors come in and take over the empire, we're going to see the art kind of change with it, really depending on their particular values at the time. So when we last talked about the emperors, we were talking about Octavian, and Octavian was the great nephew who was adopted by Julius Caesar, who becomes the first true emperor of the empire, even though, because they had an empire before they actually were they didn't have an emperor, even though they were an empire. And Julius Caesar's problem was that he technically was an emperor because they had given him that power, but when he started to act like it, that was really the problem. So after Julius Caesar, we see Caesar Augustus, or Octavian, come to power after he defeats Mark Antony in that civil war. And we see the art change, and the architecture will also drastically change under Caesar Augustus, because we see what's called the Imperial style, where they start really looking back to what Greece was doing, and that idea of how do you show youth and power and godlike? Because these emperors, if they were going to pass down their rule from family members, they had to establish that they were gods, that they had the right to rule from the gods, basically playing that old trump card. So you go back to the Greeks, who they would have studied and been familiar with, and looked at, okay, how did they do this? So we're going to see some of that Greek idealism return, in addition to having some of that Roman realism and that Roman detail. So for example, this is the Augustus Suprema Porta that we talked about, which is literally propaganda from head to toe. And you can see that parts of this are very idealized. It almost looks like the spear bearer mixed with some other Greek statues. He's got that faraway look in his eyes. He's young and eternal and strong. He's got Cupid at his feet. He's blessed by the gods. But we have that wet drapery look in the toga coming from Greece. But then we have the very realistic detail on his breastplate. So it's kind of a mix, but they're definitely going to return that Greek influence just a little bit. Now, after Caesar Augustus, Octavian, we see a succession of really not so great emperors. And this is because Octavian actually set up the precedent where his descendants were going to come after him. And the problem with that, and essentially where it's like a dynasty, is you can't really pick the people who are coming, and not all of these people are necessarily good rulers. So after Caesar Augustus passes away, we get his stepson Tiberius. And Tiberius had been waiting a very, very long time to rule and was not necessarily the nicest guy about it. In fact, he is one of the ones that really starts the persecution of the Christians. He was the emperor when Jesus of Nazareth was crucified, just to give you guys an idea of that time frame. But Tiberius is going to continue going on with what Caesar was doing, with kind of that ideal realism a little bit, because you can see by looking at Tiberius, they are capturing some realistic features. We know that it's Tiberius because it kind of realistically looks at him like him with that idealistic Greek twist to it. So Tiberius, after him, we're going to get Caligula, and Caligula probably would have been okay. By the way, it's not actually his real name. It means little boots, and it was a nickname he got because he used to walk around in like his father's boots. He's the really only male descendant available for Tiberius because his father had died, and he's his great nephew. And he, as a child, had been very, very sick and run a very high fever, and that had actually caused some areas of his brain that deal with reasoning and rationality to die. And there have been movies made about Caligula for how terrible and awful he was. Like, he was this terrible ruler, the things that he would do to people, his own people, in fact. And he was so awful, in fact, that he was murdered by his own guards, and nobody really cared. They're like, we have got to get rid of this guy. How can we do that? So he's clearly murdered, and nobody really cares. After him, we get Claudius, and Claudius didn't want to be emperor. He was not physically fit for it. He was a very nice person and he liked people, but he was not a strong guy. He did not have the temperament or the interest to be an emperor. In fact, he was very nice to the Jewish people in the empire. He was a little bit more tolerant of Christians at the time. He just didn't want this job. But when they tried to tell him he was going to be emperor, they found him hiding behind a curtain. Like, he did not want to do this thing. So eventually he's going to, do his best, and his wife, who wants her son to be the emperor, poisons Claudius. And this is where we get Nero. And history has heard of Nero. He's the stepson of Claudius. He's basically been controlled by his mother his entire life. He was repeatedly trying to kill his mother by poisoning her, drowning her, trying to do whatever he could, and she kept surviving. And eventually she did die, but he's really got mommy issues. I think half of history is just bad parenting. And he wanted to do things his own way without any threats to his power, including his mother. This is the emperor who is going to really take it out on Christians. In fact, he's the one that supposedly set fire to Rome so that he could burn it and blame it on the Christians, and people would go after the Christians. He's the ones that use Christians as street lamps at night. He's the one who did mass persecutions in the arenas to try to get rid of them. He is a huge patron of the arts. In fact, he did consider himself to be a very great artist. And at one point, he becomes so power crazy and truly does believe that he's a god. And he decides to, after the people revolt against him, to commit suicide because he felt that he was punishing them by taking himself out of this world. And when he dies, he says, what a great artist dies with me, because he was taking all of this talent and wonderful things about him with him. Basically, he thought he was teaching the world a lesson by taking himself out of it. But to be perfectly honest, he was so crazy that nobody really cared, and they were revolting against him. So you can even see the look on Claudius's face. Like, he's got that little wrinkle in his forehead. So, I mean, it's got that Greek look to it, but still that Roman realism, that it's almost like a beautiful realism. And just the poor guy, just stressed, didn't really want to do this job. And then you've got Nero over here to the right. And you can tell they've all got that short haircut that Octavian had, because that was the haircut that he took to kind of show the senators who were afraid of having an emperor that he was conservative and not too crazy, very simple haircut, and all of his followers will kind of follow that. But you can see that these are people who consider themselves to be very godlike, especially Nero. So Nero, by far, is one of the most notorious evil rulers in all existence of world history. He's just this terrible, terrible person. But one of the things we can thank him for is that he was a huge patron of the arts, especially architecture. And because of Nero, it kind of sets that standard of grand architecture, that emperors should build these great buildings and monuments to kind of set the standard and set themselves apart from other people. So other emperors are going to follow suit because of Nero. And this is where we're going to get the Colosseum. So after the Julio Claudians, so the Julio Claudians are the descendants of Julius Caesar. Okay, so you've got Julius Caesar, Caesar Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, Nero. And eventually people, after Nero committed suicide, there's no leadership in Rome anymore, and a civil war is going to break out because nobody wants any more of these descendants of Julius Caesar and Octavian to rule, because they're crazy. They clearly don't do really good things for Rome. So the civil war stops when a military general steps in and kind of says, okay, that's enough. This is what we're going to do. And we get a new dynasty that takes over. And this is the Flavians. And the Flavians, I like to put the F's together, were fighters. That's what they were good at. They don't have time for pretty. They don't have time for this godlike idea. They believe that you earn your spurs on the field of battle. Like, that's where your power comes from, not from the gods. And they are trying to now clean up this image. If they want to be emperors, they have to clean up the image of an emperor and what it stands for, and kind of bring back the grandeur of the empire and really stabilize things. So the first ruler of the Flavians we have here is Vespasian. And Vespasian, yes, he's a Christian, persecutor. He doesn't like them, all right? So he's not an entirely good guy during this time. But he is much more down to earth, much more realistic. Like, he doesn't want to be treated like an emperor. He doesn't want people dressing him or tying his shoes for him. You can see it starts to kind of bring back that realism a little bit, because these guys are like, no, wrinkles are good and scars are good, because that means I've experienced some things. I've seen some things. So they start pushing away that Greek ideal of perfection. Like, no, this is, life is hard. Scars show experience. We need to get back to that idea. So we start to see under the Flavians kind of that Republican style come back a little bit, where realism, maybe not the verist, like the very realistic that we saw in the Senate, but that realism starts to return because to them, life is ugly. War is ugly. It's not pretty. It's not glamorous. And, yes, there are the gods, but, things happen and things are, brutal in life. So that classical style that Caesar Augustus and his descendants were using, like from Greece, that's not what soldiers look like. That's not what battle looks like. So they start to really want to show those scars, those bruises, that return to experience, basically. So the Flavian emperors are led by Vespasian. And if you look at this is a great example of what I'm talking about here, because this is almost an exact copy of the Augustus Suprema Porta, but this is Vespasian, and he doesn't look like he's idealistic or godlike. There's no God here blessing him. He's got his breastplate with the toga off to the side, so you can see, clearly see that he's a general. He's got on his military sandals. He is in that orator pose because he's a good speaker, but he's got wrinkles, he's got scars. Like, this guy, has seen some stuff. And he actually became popular because Nero put this guy in charge of stopping a Jewish rebellion in Judea. So they were rebelling against Nero. So he actually gains quite a bit of popularity for that. And his son Titus will actually be the one that burns down the Jewish temple and leaves only the Wailing Wall. So kind of continues on with that military tradition. He thought it was funny that emperors would say that they were descendants of gods. He's like, why would you do that when you could make your own medal, basically, and raise your own status by what you do in life? So he's going to be very big on, under Vespasian and the Flavians, we see a lot of those military victory arches put up all over Rome because they were celebrating the military victories that was the greatness of Rome. And Vespasian's only real big mistake is that he had two sons, Titus and Domitian. And Titus was a very good emperor and Domitian not so much. And he decided to split power between his two sons, which is going to cause kind of a problem. So when we hear of the Flavians and Vespasian, this is where we really start to see the time of Rome that people hear about, like the gladiators and all of this entertainment. And the Flavians were, they were fighters. They liked to watch fights. They liked to see it. They liked sports because they believed it was a good way to keep soldiers in shape. And what they liked to do is have mock battles where they would show, like, these are the things that our empire is doing. So since you can't actually be where the fighting is happening, in these arenas, they would stage these fights that were reproductions of the fights that the Roman military had won. So, for example, if you've ever seen Gladiator, the fight that they're having is when they're fighting against Carthage. And you can see that the gladiators that are being attacked are the people from Carthage, whereas then there's the Roman soldiers who come in to save the day, even though they beat them in Gladiator. So Vespasian, in order to give the people of Rome some entertainment and see something, have something to do to occupy them, he begins the construction of the Flavian Amphitheater, which as the Colosseum today. And there's actually a really funny reason about this. They actually tore down Nero's area. So like Nero's circus in this area and like a big area of Nero's buildings, they burned it down and got rid of it to put the Colosseum basically on top of it, because it's a way to say that, listen, this is a replacement of that. We're going to forget all about Nero and everything that he did, and we're going to put this in its place. All right. So this won't be done in Vespasian's lifetime, but it will be finished under his son Titus. And think about it. This was a really great way for the Flavians to show how awesome the military was, because people could come in and see the fights and see reproductions of these great military battles. They could even see sea battles because this thing could be flooded. They could bring water in and have naval battles in it. It's this awesome place where you can see animals brought in from all over the empire as a way to say, hey, look at what we're conquering. Like, there's these animals from all over the place. And this could be covered on a hot day. They could stretch a canopy across the top of it so that there would be shade. It was the perfect way, a gift to the people of Rome, and also as a distraction to kind of show, like, hey, this is what your emperors are doing. This is what, is good about being in Rome. Okay, so the Colosseum, and again, you can go visit it today. Obviously, it is very, very well known. Has kind of become the standard for modern sports arenas and amphitheaters because with the use of concrete, you could now create large spaces like this that were open in the interior without having to be held up by columns. So this was an entirely new thing because concrete can be molded and shaped into these circular things. So it's basically two Greek theaters put together to do this. So you can see here that they had these barrel vault entrances, which are made from concrete. So you can see up here these different barrel vaults to enter that had entrance numbers over the top. Just like if you go to Busch Stadium or you go to watch the Blues play, you can tell where your seats are. And then whenever you would come inside, there would... Okay, my apologies about that for the disruption in the video. I'm recording at school and there was an announcement that came over, so I had to pause it. So getting back to this, now I can't exactly remember where we were talking about the Colosseum, but one thing I did want to make sure, if I hadn't mentioned it already, is the fact that all of this using concrete, and I'm pretty sure I did talk about it, but just to make sure, allows for the fact that this could create an open space for entertainment for people to come and view and everybody have an equal viewing, except for the fact that it was organized kind of like tickets to the Blues or the Cardinals are now, that the less money you had, the higher up the seat. Okay, so here you can see the bottom part that they talked about in the video, which you can still visit today, which would have been the places for the keeping of soldiers and the keeping of animals. And you can also see where the damage from the moisture inside would have been, where it's growing kind of the algae at the bottom, because this bottom part could hold moisture a little bit better for whenever they used to flood this for arena battles. But you can see up to here at the top, the definite barrel vaults and concrete that would have been used, and it would have been coated on the outside with marble to give it this beautiful appearance, but it really was the concrete that still allows this to be standing today. Just a couple more views of this that you can see kind of from different angles. So one thing to note on the outside, and this will be important when we talk about the Renaissance later on, is the exterior of the Colosseum. So there were these three different levels, and you can see that each one starts with the most basic level of column. So it starts with Doric on the bottom, Ionic in the middle, and then the Tuscan, like basically the Corinthian at the top. So down here at the bottom, we would call these Doric to the untrained eye, but they actually are more Tuscan because they're not fluted, because they would have gotten these from the Etruscans, and they weren't using exactly the Doric style of the Greeks. But the columns on the outside are there for decoration, and that's a big statement. They would actually use these on the exterior of their triumphal arches as well. that they don't really need these for support. The barrel vaults, like you can see here in the barrel vaulted arches, they do all the work in supporting this, and the concrete itself does it. And that basically the columns are just there for decoration. So kind of showing their supremacy in terms of how much they can build, to the point of where they don't even need the columns for that post and lintel anymore. Now, I did want to make sure that this is noted before we move on, that this used to be over Nero's Forum and Nero's Golden Palace. And the whole reason that this was put here was to kind of show deliberately that this was a new time. We were moving on from that time of Nero and moving into this more modern time under the Flavians and kind of getting rid of those old values. Now, eventually, remember I told you Vespasian of the Flavians has two sons. He has Titus and Domitian, and he kind of splits power between the two of them. And Titus is definitely the much more known one. There's actually the Arch of Titus that is located in Rome that is built of concrete with marble on the outside, and it actually up at the top of it shows the sacking of Jerusalem and then bringing back the spoils from Jerusalem and putting down the Jewish revolt. And then Titus will pass away and Domitian will rule by himself. And Domitian is nothing like Titus. He wanted to be more of an absolute ruler. He wasn't anything like his father, really. So then after this, they decide that, okay, we need another ruler to step in because this dynasty is going to end. So the Flavians are going to be succeeded by a senator who's not a military man, but he's much more of a thinker and a politician. So we're going to get Nerva, and Nerva is one of what we call the good emperors, right? Because he's going to start a succession of emperors that really do good things for Rome and kind of restore the stability and maintain what the Flavians were doing without it being so much military based. Now, Nerva is a little bit different because he starts to set this standard that instead of the emperors being chosen by succession, so like your father was, so you will be, or a male family member in your, lineage. Now it's going to be, they're going to choose a successor by adopting one. So like Nerva is going to adopt the next senator and basically say, even it could be older than him, but he's going to adopt him and say, all right, you're going to be the next emperor because you'll be good at this, instead of it being just based on the gamble of genetics and ending up with like a Caligula or a Nero. So Nerva, one of the reasons why he's considered one of the good emperors is because he kind of brings it back to the ideas of the Republic, that leaders should be chosen. Even if it's going to be an emperor, there should be some choice in the matter instead of it just being a monarchy. But he's not really a military man. Again, he's not really so good at that. He's much more on the politics side. But he is nicer than Domitian, the emperor before. So that is a benefit for Nerva. So Nerva does start to kind of, one of the cool things about him is he starts to build a forum for himself to kind of commemorate his rule. And one of the main reasons he did it is to basically wipe out one that Domitian was building for himself. So Domitian was such a bad emperor. Let's go ahead and just put a forum in its place for Nerva instead of being for Domitian. So maybe to remember some good things that were done instead of the things that Domitian had done. So Trajan is actually going to be chosen by Nerva to be the next emperor of Rome. And what's really cool about him is Trajan is not Italian. And you can see there, like the picture of him, that looks like somebody distinct. And this wasn't like that idealistic, godlike image that you would have seen in Greece or under Augustus Caesar and the Julio Claudians. It's much more realistic and looks like who he was, all right? Now, Trajan, this is a very important part of the story, was not from Rome. He's actually from Spain. So he's born into Roman-controlled Spain. And because of that, he's very open to outsiders and this idea of bringing in architects and artists and military people that they're not awesome just because they're Roman. They're awesome because of the things that they have done. And Trajan is going to really work hard to expand the empire. So it really hasn't done a great deal of expansion since the Flavians. Now we're going to see that returning the glory of Rome through expansion, which is what they are so good at. And one of his greatest achievements is actually conquering Dacia, which is today Romania. And that was one of his greatest exploits because it brought a great deal of wealth into the empire. So his empire under Trajan, it's never going to be bigger. The Roman Empire reaches its peak under Trajan. But the problem is most people who live in the Roman Empire will never see that. They'll never go to the expanses of the empire. So he's going to work to visually show within Rome itself how expansive the empire is and why that shows that he's an awesome emperor, but why it's also good for the Roman people. So one of the things that we're going to see happen under Trajan is the greatest expansion of this idea of a forum dedicated to both an emperor and to the people. So we know, we already talked about this, the Romans were big fans of a lot of the things that the Greeks did. And one of those things that they like to copy, including the art, the architecture, and the gods, was the agora. And in Greece, we already talked about it. The agora was like this open place of humans. All the roads led to it. It was below the Acropolis. So basically the propylae of the Parthenon joined up the heavenly realm, and the agora was the human realm below. So it was where you would find your markets and your government buildings. And it's where the procession in the Panathenaic festival to honor Athena would begin. So this agora in Rome basically becomes the Roman Forum. And we started off talking about this when Rome was a republic. It was the Forum Romanum. It was the people's forum. It's where there were religious buildings. They could come hear the news of the day. They could visit the political buildings. But now, okay, the forum becomes in Rome a little bit more expansive as different emperors add onto it to kind of leave their mark. So it becomes not so much about the people as it does about the emperors who build it. But Trajan is going to change that a little bit, because Julius Caesar, when he added onto the forum, it was definitely about him and his power and his family. Caesar Augustus, same thing, honoring Julius Caesar and the lineage. Then you get Nero and Domitian, who try to add on to it for their own glory. Trajan will add on his own great massive forum, but he's going to do it in a way that not only honors him, but it honors the people of Rome as well. Okay, so you can see right here that this is where the agora would have looked like in Rome. So just a kind of reminder of that you can see down here at the bottom that this is where a lot of your government buildings are. This is where a lot of your, law courts would be, your jail you can see here. And there are some religious buildings down here, but the really important ones to Athena would definitely be up here at the top. So this right here, you can see, let's see, moving on. Sorry, my slides are out of place here. I don't know why this happened. Okay, so this is what we can see as remnants of the forum that would have been in Rome. And you can see here that this is like kind of would have been a gathering place with a lot of concrete built here. You can definitely go see the ruins. You can see a couple of the victory arches. In fact, this one over here to the far left is actually the Arch of Constantine. You can see that it's got 3 arches in it, which could be because he legalized Christianity. So kind of looking at the Holy Trinity. We're not entirely sure if that's the case or not, but you can see here how the forum would have been laid out, and that you can see that not all the buildings look the same, and that's because they would have been added onto by different emperors over time. So it's not that dissimilar to the Temple of Amun-Ra at Karnak, that basically it became this place for different emperors to leave their own mark on Rome. But what Trajan's going to do is make it a little bit more about the people in addition to himself. As you can see here, looking at how the forum would have looked, right, before we get the forum of Trajan, right, you can kind of see what we were looking at here. This is kind of another view of it. And you can see Nerva's forum up here at the top. So you can see that he added onto one for himself. So the biggest imperial forum that we're going to have is the Forum of Trajan, all right? And one of the things about this is if the empire is the biggest under Trajan, then it would only make sense that his forum should be a visual representation of that it basically is this 1/3 of a mile long forum to show this is how big our empire is. My forum is a representative of that I've done that. And he built it using spoils from his conquest. So he's not taking from the people. He's like, look, we are so successful in what we have done. I'm able to use that money to build this forum for us to show how awesome Rome is. And yes, it honors me as Trajan because I did that. but still at the same time, it honors Rome and the greatness of Rome. It is near the forums of Caesar and Caesar Augustus, which would kind of be as a way to show them up a little bit, that he's done even more of that. I will show you the elements of it. It won't be finished under Trajan. It's actually going to be finished under Hadrian, who comes after him. But what does it say that an emperor after Trajan made sure that this forum was finished of a earlier emperor, to kind of show that maybe he's continuing on his greatness, or that he appreciates what Trajan did for the people? Now, what's kind of crazy about this is, in this area where Trajan's forum was going to fit, there was a market in place. So Trajan actually said, we're going to tear down that market, and I'm going to build an even bigger, more elaborate one for the people. Okay, so this is a picture of, and you can see it's actually a video I'm going to show you, of the column of Trajan, which would have sat right in the middle of this. So let's take a look for a second. Okay, so it's probably not a surprise after looking at this why they called Trajan this best leader, why he was so great. And he is, along with Nerva, one of the 5 good emperors that they're going to have in Rome. Pardon the bell. So when the AP exam comes along, if they put the Forum of Trajan on there, they're going to expect you to know all of the parts of that and how it not only honors him as a ruler, but it does serve as kind of a gift to the people of Rome to kind of show like, yes, this was expensive, but our empire built this, our expansion built this, and look at all that I have provided for you. So you can see again, you've got Caesar and you've got Augustus. So Julius Caesar and Augustus and Nervas that he basically built to take one out for Domitian. And then you would walk in, and again, it's meant to be an experience, just like the Acropolis in Greece is. So you would walk through, you would see this equestrian statue of Trajan sitting right there on a horse, which shows his military greatness. And then over here to the right, you would see these massive marketplaces, which is basically an arch flipped onto its side to buttress that hill up that they had carved out and created these open air markets, which again, because of the use of concrete, they don't have to have these weight bearing walls, which allows in much more light and air, which makes these good living and shopping places. And because of all the goods that were coming into Rome, they could buy these in this marketplace. So it really shows the benefits of having this empire. And then you would have, of course, the Basilica Oppia, this massive basilica, which you can tell is a Roman basilica because it's got the rounded apse on each end, whereas Christian basilicas are only going to have the apse on one end to draw your attention to the rituals. Then you can see here the little marker of Trajan's column, which show his military greatness. And again, I'll zoom in on that, but you can see the high relief that they're going to adopt from Greece so that you can see it all the way up to the top. And then you have the Temple of Trajan, which was built later under Hadrian to honor him. So the entire thing is propaganda for Trajan, but at the same time, it's to honor Rome and its greatness. And don't forget, we have the two libraries here, one in Greek, one in Latin, so that it increases the learning of the Greek people. So kind of a gift to them. And if you were in the libraries, you could go up to the upper balcony and look out, and that would allow you to read the upper levels of the story on Trajan's column. And starting from the bottom, Trajan shows up repeatedly through this. And because Romans use this realism in their art, you can definitely recognize that, oh, that's Trajan. I can tell by his face that's actually him, and the things that he was doing as part of this, because it's these against the Dacians, these victories that paid for this entire thing, not tax money on the people of Rome. It's kind of like this is where the money came from. So all of this sends a very good message to the people of Rome about who Trajan was. So this is just a little bit more detail on the Basilica Oppia, which I kind of already talked about a little bit. And you can see this is what they think the interior would have looked like. And you can see they've got Corinthian columns because that Corinthian style and the later Greek styles is what the Romans are going to adopt, which is why those statues they showed you in the video of the Dacians that they conquered have kind of that Hellenistic look to them of the emotion that comes with their statues, not just admiring it to be pretty, because that's when the Romans would have encountered Greece, is more during their Hellenistic time. And then you can see up here at the top that clear story that they probably would have adopted from Egypt, because the Egyptians had that intact already, and it would have allowed all the light into this area and this spectacular space. This was probably what the front of the entranceway would have looked like, and you can see the SPQR. So that SPQR would be Senatus Populus Romana, so for the Senate and people of Rome. So to have that on the very front of this entranceway would have really shown that he was building this for the Senate, for the people of Rome, and not just for himself. And I think it's really funny, there's a famous quote about that statue of Trajan on his horse in the middle of his forum, and supposedly he was showing this forum to a visitor from the Middle East, and the person had said, I really wish I had a horse like this, a statue like that. And he's only when you can have a stable like this can you have a horse like that. So basically showing this visitor that the reason that I have a horse like this is because I'm that powerful and I have this entire forum built to me. And one thing that I do think is important to note is that the architect that he brought into this was Apollodorus of Damascus, which was outside of Rome. And Apollodorus was Greek in learning, but he was also from Damascus outside of Rome. So Trajan is bringing in people from outside of Rome to help build this because, number one, it represents the empire, and this is an architect from somebody in the empire, but it also shows that Trajan was an outsider. He was Spanish, so he is accepting of other architects, including those learned in Greek, because Greeks were the supreme architects before the Romans, and he wanted their style brought into this. So one that they do mention on the 250 is the Forum of Trajan and the Column of Trajan specifically. And in this, you can see starting from the bottom all the way to the top, it would be about 625 feet if it was completely laid out. And Trajan reoccurs, as I mentioned, throughout it. And it is done in that Greek high relief so that you can really see it from no matter where you are standing. And it was supposed to hold Trajan's ashes. We're not entirely sure. I don't remember if it does anymore or not. I think they may have been removed or disintegrated. And there was a statue of Trajan at the top at one time. But later, it was actually replaced with a statue of St. Peter. And one of the reasons for this is it was going to be taken down because it was Roman heretic pagan. So to protect this actual column, they put a statue of St. Peter at the top so that way it couldn't be touched and it couldn't be destroyed, which is why we still have it to this day. So this is just to show you a little bit of the detail that's on it. You can even see like in the gods on this that are blessing the scene. Like, so you've got basically Poseidon here, or Saturn, or Uranus down here at the bottom. And you can see that it's got the muscles of the god on it. And they make the barbarians look like very tough and worthy opponents, which is something that they would have picked up from Hellenistic Greeks. So to really show that these riches that he won were very, very hard fought. Like, this wasn't just something that was easily done. So it's visual propaganda to specifically honor what Trajan did to get the money that paid for this expansive forum. So you can see here zoomed in a little bit just how much they use the high relief and how cool that is, because it definitely shows, like, look, they even have victory arches in it, and they put barrel vaults into the sculptures. But because they have the high relief, you can get the images of that, and it kind of creates the shadow and the depth and makes this almost cinematic as you would walk around it and view it. Just a couple other pieces of that for you. And there is the column of Trajan standing today. They're in Rome with the statue of St. Peter at the top of it to basically protect it from being torn down. All right, we're going to stop there, and the next part of our lecture will look at the emperors from Hadrian on through the fall of the empire.